In 2005, middle school teacher and novelist Rick Riordan released The Lightning Thief, the first of 5 novels chronicling the adventures of modern-day demigod Percy Jackson. Drawing from his own son Haley's struggles with ADHD and dyslexia, Rick Riordan used the Greek myths and legends as a way to dramatize and reinterpret these struggles, with dyslexia being a symptom of godhood in the Percy Jackson universe. I loved the Percy Jackson books as a kid, and I read them when I was the same age as Percy was at the start of the books, which was a great jumping-on point. The books are still great, but with the benefit of hindsight, it's pretty obvious that Rick Riordan is hardcore ripping off the Lightning Thief from the first Harry Potter. Tell me if this sounds familiar. A black-haired protagonist discovers he has magical powers over nature and that he can talk to specific animals. He makes a street-smart best friend who grew up in the magical world and can tell him about it, while his book-smart best friend gives him academic background on the villains he has to fight. After receiving his obligatory magical weapon, our hero goes to a magical school for magical kids. Once people find out who he is, he becomes a celebrity, but one of the teachers hates his guts and resents his popularity. Our hero then teams up with his 2 sidekicks to go on a time-sensitive adventure to find a magical MacGuffin, but it turns out he had the MacGuffin all along. Along the way, he gets a gift from his dad that allows him to travel more easily, and he has to fight Cerberus. At the end of the book, it turns out one of our hero's teachers at the magical school was secretly working for the big bad evil whose name no one will say, and we find out that the real plot of these novels is going to be about fighting that guy. But I don't want to make it seem like the whole story is identical, because a lot of what makes Percy Jackson great is what it does differently. The single biggest difference is that Riordan tells his story directly from Percy's perspective, rather than via an omniscient third-person narrator. This allows Percy to make jokes and references about his situation in his head, and lends itself to the series' ridiculous chapter titles like I accidentally vaporize my pre-algebra teacher, my mother teaches me bullfighting, or a god buys us cheeseburgers. Of course, because the story is in first person, Rick Riordan has to invent a way of communicating exposition and character information that Percy wouldn't otherwise know, so he gives demigods the ability to prophetically dream important plot points so the story can happen. Another big difference is that Percy isn't an orphan like Harry Potter, with his mom being very much alive and Percy's dad being the literal Greek god Poseidon. Because Poseidon is one of the 3 major gods alongside Hades and Zeus, Percy's existence is a big deal in the Greek world. In the canon of this universe, the Second World War was primarily waged because of the actions of the respective children of Poseidon, god of the sea, Hades, god of the underworld, and Zeus, god of storms, because the children of the big 3 are unusually powerful, even for demigods. After the war, the 3 principal gods swore that they would stop adulterating with mortal women, but all 3 of them fell off the bandwagon at some point or another, with Poseidon fathering Percy, Zeus fathering a girl called Talia, and Hades fathering Nico and Bianca. At this point in the story, nobody knows Nico and Bianca exist, and Talia got turned into a tree, so Percy is the only major demigod in play. When Zeus's master bolt is stolen, the symbol of his power, Zeus blames Percy as the son of Poseidon. This is because gods aren't allowed to steal each other's symbols of power directly, while mortals have a magical mist which prevents them from detecting the gods, which leaves only a demigod capable of stealing such a symbol. What the gods also know at this point, and Percy doesn't, is the full version of a prophecy from the Oracle of Delphi, which says that a child of the big 3 gods will be able to decide whether to destroy Olympus or not. Because Percy is both a major demigod and possibly the subject of this prophecy, he's highly suspect, and it would be safer for the gods if he just died, so he would never reach 16. With all of this in the background, it forces Percy to team up with his new friends from Camp Half-Blood, the summer camp for heroes. Percy is joined by Grover the satyr and Annabeth, the daughter of Athena, to go on a quest to find the real thief before the gods go to war with one another, and to clear his own name. In the Percy Jackson universe, the Greek gods and important figures from the Greek world have a kind of magical tie to whichever nation is most important in global politics. So the Greek gods moved over time, from living in Greece, then to Rome, then to various European nations, and finally to America, as the spirit of Western civilization moved. Along with the Greek gods themselves came various important mythical villains and the important places in their respective stories, which adopt the culture of whichever nation they go to. This means that places like Mount Olympus get moved to the Empire State Building, or the entrance to the underworld is in Los Angeles. After a series of misadventures in which seemingly ordinary roadside attractions and otherwise mundane traveling get a special Greek twist, Percy meets up with the god of war Ares. At this point in the story, Percy and the gang think that Zeus's master bolt was probably stolen by Hades in an effort to cause war between the gods to expand his kingdom, and Ares offers to help them on their journey by giving them backpacks of supplies and a trip towards LA. After nearly getting trapped in the Lotus Hotel and Casino where time stands still, a Rick Riordan update of the land of the Lotus Eaters from the Odyssey, the gang finally make it to the underworld by bribing the ferryman Charon into taking them to Hades' realm. Except, plot twist, Hades didn't steal the Master Bolt from Zeus, and he's offended at always being Olympus's scapegoat. He also reveals that his own symbol of power, the Helm of Darkness, has also been stolen. Percy and the gang realize that a third party is trying to pit the gods against each other, as Zeus's Master Bolt appears in Percy's backpack. Making their escape before Hades can steal the Master Bolt for real, the trio realize that Ares was trying to trick them by giving them the bolt, and Percy has a climactic showdown with the god of war. Thanks to a mix of Percy's exposition-dumping dreams and some educated guessing, Percy deduces that Ares was unwittingly collaborating with a secret big bad, who turns out to be the old titan Kronos, father of the elder gods. Dashing to New York and the Empire State Building, Percy takes the elevator up to Mount Olympus, and arrives just in time to convince Poseidon and Zeus to call off the war. Celebrated as a hero back at Camp Half-Blood, Percy thinks his troubles are over until the real lightning thief reveals himself, Percy's friend Luke, the son of Hermes, who is bitter about how little the gods care about their mortal offspring, and who rushes off to join Kronos. The next installment of the Percy Jackson series features the abduction of Grover, and a quest to find the Golden Fleece. But Percy isn't supposed to be doing the questing this time around, since Clarisse, a daughter of Ares, is supposed to find the fleece instead in a place called the Sea of Monsters, which is really the Bermuda Triangle because of course it is. Camp Half-Blood needs the fleece because it can supposedly heal any ailment, and the magical tree, that used to be Talia, the daughter of Zeus, is what protects the camp from monsters. But with Grover having been abducted in the Sea of Monsters, Percy and Annabeth start an unsanctioned quest of their own to find him. They're joined this time around by Tyson, a Cyclops who's a half-brother to Percy, since Tyson's dad is also Poseidon. Annabeth isn't a big fan of Tyson because she's racist against Cyclops, since it was because of a Cyclops that Talia got turned into a tree in the first place, and Talia, Luke, and Annabeth used to be friends adventuring together. But Annabeth and Tyson make a begrudging alliance as they start their quest. Unfortunately, the team gets captured by Luke, who is now a full-blown supervillain in charge of a ship full of monsters who are on Team Kronos. Luke is also trying to find the Golden Fleece, and he plans to use it to resurrect Kronos. Percy and friends escape to a Confederate ghost ship and join up with Clarisse, who hates Percy for kicking her dad's butt during the last book. This whole book seems to revolve around jumping from one ship to another, and in that vein, the Confederate ship gets destroyed by sea monsters. Tyson is presumed dead, but Percy and Annabeth make it to a lifeboat. This in turn leads them to the island of Circe, where a misandrist witch turns men into pigs. Stealing an 1800s pirate ship, which Percy can sail because of his sea god powers, they move on to their next disaster when Annabeth nearly drowns after hearing the call of the sirens. Finally, they reach the island of the Cyclops, Polyphemus, where they reunite with Tyson. They then rescue Grover and nab the fleece, but Percy lets Clarisse take all the credit for the success. Like the last book, there's a final twist after the main adventure because when the Golden Fleece is hung on Talia's tree, it doesn't just heal the tree, it releases Talia and turns her back into a demigod girl. This ending was incredibly cool when I read it as a kid, but it irritated the heck out of me that the next book in the series doesn't pick up right where this cliffhanger leaves off, because I really wanted to see that initial conversation between Talia and Percy and Annabeth. Instead, the next book, The Titan's Curse, jumps forward with Talia, Percy, and Annabeth on a mission at a military school to save two demigods named Nico and Bianca. At this school, an Annabeth and Percy romantic subplot advances as they join a school dance while watching the demigods. Per usual, things go awry when the gang runs into a monster, but they're joined by the Hunters of Artemis, immortal virgin warriors. Annabeth is captured and forced to take the place of Atlas, the titan who holds up the world, and Artemis goes on the hunt for a mythical monster, leaving her second-in-command Zoe in charge. Nico's sister Bianca decides to join the immortal Huntresses, much to Nico's consternation. Zoe and the Huntresses make a pit stop at Camp Half-Blood before going on a quest to Mount Tamalpais, a Titan's stronghold. As per usual, Percy sneaks off on a mission to save his friend, but first he rescues a mysterious cow creature he nicknames Bessie. Percy convinces Zoe to let him join the quest for real, and they travel through the junkyard of the gods. While there, Bianca realizes that she and Nico are many decades older than they thought, because they were both placed in the Lotus Hotel and Casino as kids, before being released that year. They accidentally disturb an automaton at the junkyard, and Bianca unfortunately gets killed. So they hightail it to the next action set piece at the Hoover Dam, where they fight Spartoroi, skeleton warriors sent by the Titan Atlas. There Percy meets Rachel Elizabeth Dare, an unusual mortal who can see through the magical mist that obscures Greek creatures, and she helps Percy escape. Wanting answers about the monster Artemis is hunting, Percy wrangles a minor sea god named Nereus, who reveals that the cow creature Bessie is the monster Artemis has been hunting, because it's a potential way to finish the aforementioned Great Prophecy, since a major demigod who slays Bessie will gain the power to defeat Olympus. Next, Percy, Zoe, and Talia get a lift from Annabeth's estranged father, who lends them a car to get to the top of Mount Tamalpais, where it's revealed that Zoe is the Titan Atlas's daughter, and we find Artemis holding up the sky so Annabeth could live. Luke tries to convince Talia to join the Titan team, since she is almost 16 and could fulfill the Great Prophecy, but Talia declines, and Percy takes a turn at holding up the sky so Artemis can help fight the Titans. The heroes prevail, but Zoe kicks the bucket, and Artemis turns her into a new constellation, which I guess is something the gods can do in this universe. Finally, they all head to Mount Olympus, where the irate gods decide whether to just kill Talia and Percy to avoid the ramifications of the prophecy altogether. Talia elects to join the Hunters of Artemis, which means she will never turn 16, and Percy skates by after a vote by the gods goes in his favor. Back at Camp Half-Blood, Nico blames Percy for Bianca's death and runs away, but not before revealing that he is a son of Hades when he dispels the skeleton warriors. But Percy decides to shield the younger demigod by dealing with the Great Prophecy himself and keeping Nico's identity a secret between him and his friends. Also, can I just say that John Rocco's original cover art for this third book was incredible? This was my wallpaper on multiple tablets and computers over the years, and the original run of this whole series has really great art. The fourth Percy Jackson book follows the adventures of Percy through the Labyrinth of Daedalus, which, like most other things, has been magically shifted to be in America, and in this interpretation is a secret underground network that connects the entire country. The story launches with Percy about to go on a date with Annabeth, but before he can meet up with her, Percy gets into a fight with shape-shifting cheerleaders at his new high school, and meets up with Rachel Elizabeth Dare, the girl from the last book. Some bad timing when Annabeth arrives leads to classic teenage love triangle shenanigans because Annabeth is unhappy that Percy is fighting monsters with other women. Back at Camp Half-Blood, Grover the Satyr is in trouble with the Satyr leaders, the Council of Cloven Elders. It's the mission of all satyrs to find the missing god of nature, Pan, but Grover especially wants to be the one to find him. The council, however, tells Grover he has to find Pan in 1 week or his searching license will be revoked, which basically means he's toast. Meanwhile, Percy receives a mysterious message that a certain son of Hades is trying to bring his sister back to life. Additionally, Percy is introduced to a new swordmaster, Quintus, and he and Annabeth discover that there is an entrance to the magical labyrinth inside the camp, which could serve as an invasion route for Luke and his monster army to invade. That means, of course, that it's time for a quest, with Annabeth in the lead this time, joined by Tyson, Grover, and Percy. The mission this time is to find Daedalus, who they believe is still alive, having somehow cheated death, and who resides in his workshop. After a confrontation with the enigmatic Hera, wife of Zeus, with Janus, the god of choices, and with Briareus, a 100-handed one, they meet up with Nico at a place called the Triple G Ranch, staffed by the three-bodied Geryon and his immortal servant Riordan. After Geryon betrays the group, Percy successfully kills him by shooting him sideways to puncture all his hearts. Bianca's spirit reveals that she was the one to tell Percy about Nico, because she doesn't want Nico to try to resurrect her, and she wants him to forgive Percy. Next, they visit Hephaestus, who agrees to help them with their quest if they find out who's been using his forge in Mount St. Helens without permission. But when Grover senses the presence of the god Pan, he and Tyson accept a side quest and leave Annabeth and Percy to continue the main storyline. At the forge, there are of course more monsters to fight. Percy tells Annabeth to head back to Hephaestus while he holds off the monsters, and Annabeth gives him a kiss. The mountain erupts and blows Percy to the island of Calypso, a Titan's daughter cursed to fall in love with heroes who visit her island. Hephaestus drops by and explains that the eruption of Mount St. Helens was actually caused by Percy, whose Poseidon powers are growing, since earthquakes as well as the sea are part of Percy's dad's power set. Reluctantly leaving the beautiful Calypso, Percy heads back to Camp Half-Blood where he walks in on his own funeral and an extremely irate Annabeth. Thanks to Hephaestus' help, Percy now knows how to navigate the labyrinth and find Daedalus. They simply need a rare mortal who can see through the magical mist, someone like Rachel Elizabeth Dare. Enlisting Rachel's help, they take another trip into the labyrinth. Unfortunately, the right way through is also very dangerous, and Percy runs into Luke and his posse, and has to fight the half-giant Antaeus in a gladiatorial arena. After this, they finally reach Daedalus' workshop, and find out that Quintus is Daedalus, or at least Daedalus' soul transferred into a robot. They also meet up with Nico and the evil cheerleaders from earlier. After dealing with the cheerleaders, Percy discovers that Luke's body is becoming the new host for Kronos, so that he can rise from Tartarus. The gang also finds Grover and the god Pan, who dies and dispels his spirit among the group, giving an extra part of his power to Grover. Meanwhile, Luke's monsters arrive at camp, and a major battle occurs in which Grover shows off new Pan powers from the nature god. Daedalus reveals that the labyrinth is tied to his life force, and he allows Nico to dispel his soul from the robot and send him to the underworld, which causes the labyrinth to slowly disintegrate, preventing monsters from getting back in that way in the future. The book ends with a party for Percy's 15th birthday, 1 year closer to the major prophecy. To everyone's shock, Poseidon himself makes a surprise appearance at Percy's birthday under the guise of a mortal, and Nico drops by to give Percy spoilers for what's going to happen in Book 5. The great thing about the Percy Jackson series, at least in my mind, is that every book is better than the last one, with the exception of The Sea of Monsters, which is definitely the weakest installment. I always looked forward to getting to The Last Olympian when I read and reread this series as a kid, my only complaint with it being that it cliffhangers the reader to make them try to buy the Heroes of Olympus series, which is nowhere near as good as the Percy Jackson series, and not half as funny because it's told in third person rather than from Percy's POV. The Last Olympian begins with Percy on a date with Rachel Elizabeth Dare. Suddenly, fellow demigod Charles Beckendorf arrives to get Percy's help in blowing up the Princess Andromeda, Luke's command ship from earlier. Beckendorf blows himself up to take out the ship, but Percy escapes because sea god powers. Next, Percy takes a trip to his dad's underwater kingdom, where Poseidon appears as an old man, due to stress from his battle with the old Lord of the Sea, the Titan Oceanus. Percy wants to stay and fight, but his dad tells him to return to Camp Half-Blood, where Percy finally hears the full version of the Great Prophecy, which has been kept a secret from him until now. The subject of the prophecy, Percy, will have to die once he fulfills it, whether he saves Olympus or destroys it, which is kind of a bummer, but Percy isn't dead yet, and Nico has an idea, one he's been trying to convince Percy of since the last book. Nico explains that Kronos, inhabiting Luke's body, has taken on the curse of Achilles, Rick Riordan's interpretation of the story of the goddess Thetis, who dipped her mortal son Achilles into the river Styx to make him invincible, but neglected to dip his foot all the way in, making him mortal only if he was struck there. Nico's idea is that Percy should jump in the river Styx, just like Luke apparently did, making himself invincible unless he is hit in a specific spot. Before Percy takes a swim in the river Styx, Nico and he go on a visit to Luke's mom, May Castellan, who, though very nice, has gone completely insane, which made Luke's upbringing pretty rough. May Castellan went insane because she tried to become the new host for the Oracle of Delphi, which is the one giving out all these prophecies, but Hades cursed the Oracle of Delphi in the early 20th century, preventing the girl who was the Oracle of that time from passing on the spirit to a new host, so she just hangs out as a mummy in the attic at Camp Half-Blood, occasionally giving ominous prophecies. Anyone who tries to host the spirit just goes insane instead. Hades cursed the previous oracle because he was mad that Zeus killed his girlfriend, Nico and Bianca's mom, and out of fear that something would happen to them too, he stowed them away in the Lotus Hotel and Casino until the third book. From May Castellan, Nico confirms his suspicions that for the curse of Achilles to work, you need your mother's blessing. With this information, Percy visits his mom in New York to convince her to let him try. Having convinced his mom, Nico tells Percy that there's an entrance to the underworld in Central Park, the door used by Orpheus when he tried to rescue his wife. Because the minor Greek gods are mad at the 12 Olympians for excluding them, gods like Morpheus are supporting Kronos in the upcoming war. Morpheus is the god of dreams, and he's put a multiple-month magical sleep on Grover, who Nico and Percy find dozing in Central Park. After they wake up Grover uses satyr music to open the Orpheus door to the underworld, and Percy goes through it. Unfortunately, Hades tricked Nico into bringing Percy here in exchange for a lore dump on Nico's backstory. What Nico didn't know was that Hades planned to imprison Percy while Hades hides from Kronos, but with Nico's help, Percy escapes, and finally immerses himself in the river Styx, making himself mostly invincible, allowing him to destroy Hades' forces and defeat the god of death himself. After seeing Percy get his butt kicked for 4 books, seeing a virtually invincible Percy in action is so cathartic and makes the 5th book way cooler. From here on out, the rest of the book is basically one ginormous battle for New York and the fate of Olympus above the Empire State Building, with Percy and the other demigods from Camp Half-Blood, as well as some helpful robots from Daedalus defending the city against an army of monsters. Morpheus has put the entire city of New York to sleep, except for the demigods and monsters, so if and when our heroes win, nobody will even know about it. The first big set piece takes place on the Williamsburg Bridge, where Percy unveils his spectacular new powers to kick butt, and he basically solos a wave of Kronos' army. Percy's exposition-heavy dreams really go into overdrive in the 5th book, and he gets all kinds of info about the past, present, and future. And while it's very interesting in context, none of it changes the essential issue, which is that Percy is only one guy, and even one invincible guy cannot fight an entire army. The through line of the 5th book is the centrality of home and family, and the book highlights the last Olympian, Hestia, goddess of the hearth and the home, to focus on that theme. Through Percy's efforts, he is able to convince Hades to give up his old hatred of the other Olympians and fight the army in Manhattan, and to convince Poseidon to fight on land and allow his ocean palace to crumble. In the final confrontation on Mount Olympus, Percy and Annabeth get through to Luke, who fights the spirit of Kronos within him, and Percy lets Luke stab himself in his one vulnerable Achilles spot, banishing Kronos back to Tartarus and fulfilling the prophecy, because the second half of it was never about Percy dying, but about Luke. The grateful Olympians bestow honor upon Annabeth, but to Percy they offer the gift of becoming a god himself. But Percy gives up that wish, choosing instead to ask the gods to recognize all of their children, and the minor gods, ensuring that nothing like the plot of these 5 books would happen in the future, because there wouldn't be disgruntled minor characters who could align behind people like Kronos. Back at Camp Half-Blood, because Hades has finally been accepted by the other Olympians, his old curse fades, and Rachel is able to become the new Oracle of Delphi, at which point she breaks up with Percy. And with the minor gods and Hades becoming accepted, plans begin to construct new cabins for their demigod children, and the book ends with Annabeth and Percy finally getting together after their will-they-won't-they thing. Thanks for watching.